Joining us to discuss what Mr Barnier had to say is Deputy Leader of the European Parliament, Richard Corbett, and David Campbell Bannerman, Conservative MEP and Board Member for Leave Means Leave. David and Richard, welcome to you both. I'll start with you, Mr Campbell Bannerman. That sounds like a man, Michel Barnier, today, who's a bit fed up.
Well, this is a negotiation like everything, and this is a starting point. I was reassured that he doesn't want to be discourteous. There was the accusation he called discourteous on this. I was reassured by that. But no, there are some important elements like freedom of movement carrying on, or citizens' rights during this transition period, which are not acceptable to Britain. And I think, we need to negotiate these points. But I think all he's saying, really, is, there are a number of difficulties that we need to iron out over the next few months. But that doesn't worry me so much. I don't think that will stop the process. OK,
Richard, just a few things to iron out, nothing to worry about.
Well, I understand Mr Barnier's exasperation, because 20 months after the referendum, we still have no clarity from the British government about what it wants to secure about so many things. We've just had these 2 extra meetings of the Cabinet's Brexit committee. Now they've decided to go away and have an away day because they've still not been able to reach internal agreement within the British government about our key demands in these negotiations. So I understand why he's frustrated about the longer-term issues. And about the transition, well, really the EU is saying, OK, if you want to have a transitional period and stay in the single market and the customs union during that period, that's fine with us, as long as you play by the same rules as the rest of us during that period. That's not totally unreasonable as a starting point in a negotiation.
OK, let's pick up those 2 issues there. So the first one that Richard was talking about, Mr Campbell Bannerman, is the problems we're having within our own government at the moment. What have these meetings of the subcommittees achieved this week? Because it doesn't appear that anything has been achieved. Michel Barnier claiming that we haven't brought anything to the table.
That's not the case. That's not what David Davis has said. I mean, we have to recognise we're in the end game now. We need to know by March what kind of deal we want from the EU. And I think, Richard has a point on that one, that, we need to decide by then in order to move forward on the trade deal. I'm arguing for Super Canada or CETA+++, that kind of deal that goes way beyond the Canada deal. But this has been discussed at cabinet level, and I mean, I think it's good they are discussing it. You get mixed reports about what's been decided, not decided. But this is why they are spending this time.
For a deal to be agreed by March, should we not be past discussing it?
No, I think
amongst ourselves.
There's a real debate. I mean, this is fundamental to our future relationship with the EU, and the Cabinet's deciding it, and quite rightly. But we do need to know what we're going to have by March, or we're going to be asking for by March. As I say, I think a Super Canada deal is where we need to go. But it's not just that. They've been talking about immigration, they've been talking about security. There's a lot of other issues which are not just about trade, which need to be sorted out.
And just on Mr Corbett's other point there about playing by their rules during a transition period, is it fair to say that if we want all the benefits of the transition period, we do have to sign up to those rules? Well,
I'm worried about certain aspects of that. I mean, there's talk of punishment, if we don't follow. I mean, there are things like sincere cooperation, which basically means if you act in any way that they regard as undermining EU interests, then they can slap sanctions on you, like, withdrawal trade benefits, close the single market. There's been some horror stories on that. I don't think the EU should be acting like a sort of schoolmaster, sort of telling off a naughty child. We've got to be adults about this, and we need to negotiate an adult faction.
OK, Mr Corbett, is there a point that Michel Barnier is acting like a schoolmaster, like Mr Campbell Bannerman says, and we're not getting a fair crack of the whip here?
Essentially, the other 27 countries are saying, OK, if you want to stay in for an extra transitional period, but then you must follow the same rules as the rest of us do. Play in the single market according to the same criteria, the same rules. That's not actually unreasonable. And to say that if you break the rules, and if we no longer have a court of justice to settle any disputes, then as in any other international trading arrangement or other arrangements, they are entitled to take countermeasures. When you look at it, it's not that unreasonable.
Surely there's a middle ground in there, though, where we could discuss some other body that isn't the ECJ to oversee and rule on these kind of disagreements, rather than just saying, well, we're going to punish you for it.
Well, then the UK should put that on the table in the negotiations. The rest of Europe is still waiting with bated breath to hear what this government finally decides it wants to propose on all these issues. We've still not put anything forward. All we have is deadlock within the government, while at the same time we're beginning to find out that the costs of Brexit are getting higher and higher. The economic damage that it would cause, especially a hard Brexit if these issues are not resolved.
Mr. Campbell Bannerman, just on Mr. Corbett's point there, you were shaking your head.
I think Richard is following some of these absurd economic forecasts from the Treasury. I mean, they were proven. The forecasts made 3 months ago are wrong. What about 15 years ahead? I mean, I'm sorry, Brexit will bring a lot of opportunities. And one of the big opportunities is the ability, I'm on the Trade Committee of the European Parliament, is to do trade deals with the biggest economies in the world, United States, China, India, which the EU is failing to deliver on. I know that because I'm on the committee.
And you think we'll get better deals than the ones we have via the EU, that we've negotiated with the whole clout of Europe, the world's largest market, that all these countries are going to say, oh, we'll give an even better deal for just Britain.
Because they prefer to deal with a smaller country. I mean, Switzerland has got a trade deal with China. The EU hasn't.
Yes, and the very disadvantageous
New Zealand has as well.
It can't even sell its watches duty-free.
Well, Mr. Corbett,
to any Swiss person about it, find out about it.
Mr. Corbett, on the point about the forecast, can you reference one 15-year forecast that's been correct?
Forecasts give the most likely assessment with the data available. They could indeed be even worse.
Give us an example of one that's been. Can you give us an example of one that's been right?
Go on, Richard.
Many have been right in terms of the overall direction. Of course, they're out, perhaps better, perhaps worse by a certain margin. But the key thing here is that forecast after forecast by the government itself, by independent think tanks, are all saying that this is likely to be a highly costly exercise, destroying jobs in Britain, hurting our economy.
No, I think there are wonderful opportunities. I mean, you've got your free trade agreements, but also what isn't built into a lot of these forecasts is red tape. I mean, I know you love it, a lot of it. Working time directive that costs the NHS $4 billion a year. Why don't we review that and get rid of that so surgeons don't, you know, the fact they sleep at a hospital overnight doesn't count towards working time. Look what the Royal College of Surgeons is saying, the NHS is saying. There are a lot of red tape which the EU is forced on us, we have to sign up to. We can now review post-Brexit, and we can scrap a lot of it post-Brexit. That's a wonderful opportunity.
Without going into the minutiae of each detail, I just want to go back to one of the huge issues that Mr. Barnier flagged up. Mr. Corbett, I'll start with you. He said the Irish border solution must be precise, clear and unambiguous, implying, I suppose, that it's been none of those things so far. What do you think the solution there is?
Well, the rest of Europe is waiting with bated breath to hear how, if we decide to leave the customs union and therefore make that a customs border, how on earth you have a customs border without customs controls? How do you do it? The British government has to put some ideas on the table. It still hasn't done so.
OK, lastly, because we're just running short of time, he asked the question, how do you do it, Mr. Campbell Bannerman?
You do it in a computer. You do it, you pre-register. Sorry, you laugh at it. It's done in Canada, the Canada-US border, the FAST system. Have you heard of authorised economic operators, Richard? This is a World Customs Organisation.
Go and see these borders.
No, look,
they
can
have
all be
hard
sorted.
borders and checks and controls.
OK, so technology is the answer. OK, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, for time. Mr. Corbett, Mr. Campbell Bannerman, thank you very much for joining us here on Sky News.